In this video, I'm going to be covering a couple of special hinges. One of them is the Blum full overlay 95-degree blind corner hinge, and the other one is the Rockler 270-degree Aximat hinge. This is actually a hinge I'm using on one of the cabinets. So I've already covered, have a detailed video on the regular 110-degree Blum soft closing hinge. I'll put a link on that video, and this is a continuation of that video. So I'm not going to be going into details of actually putting the installation of the hinge. I'm just going to go over the differences. Now, when we switch to another hinge, there is fundamentally three things that we need to understand, and that varies from hinge to hinge. Sometimes it's the same, sometimes it's different. Number one is the boring distance. So this is a bore, a hole that is bored into. The boring distance is how far is the hole from the edge of the door. And that's usually standard, and sometimes there is some flexibility given as to how far or how close to the edge the bore can be. Sometimes it can go to the other side of the edge. That means it won't be a full circle. It also helps, the boring distance also helps adjust how much overlap we need for frameless cabinets, how much overlap on top of the cabinet we need. The second fundamental thing to remember, or that could be different, is this depth of the hole. The standard Blum hinges go half an inch, so about 13 millimeter. And this could vary from hinge to hinge. And the third fundamental thing is how far is this hinge plate, which sits on the cabinet wall, how far is it from the edge of the cabinet, the front edge face of the cabinet. And that's usually standard in Blum hinges. It's about 37 millimeter. So once we understand these three fundamental things, all we have to look for is the difference between the hinge from one hinge to another hinge. And that's what will dictate any changes that needs to be done. Now, this is the first special hinge I'm going to try. This is the Blum 79B 9980 95-degree blind corner hinge. It's the same kind of hinge that I did the first video for, but it's the blind corner hinge, meaning that instead of the door usually sitting on the side cabinet wall, it's actually on a front face frame almost. It's not really a face frame cabinet, but it's almost like a face frame. And the blind corner is because the hinge is inside the corner and you can't see the wall plate. That's why it's called a blind corner. And some cabinet types will have to use blind corner cabinets because they're not going to have this wall to put the hinge on, but they'll have a horizontal structure here, basically meaning that when the door is closed, the door will be parallel to the horizontal structure and the hinge is hidden behind and it opens up. Now, since I'm using Blum hinges and it's the same company, almost every dimension will remain the same. That means it's a 35 millimeter a bore or cup, as it is called. And by the way, I didn't talk about the cup diameter. I'm assuming 35 millimeter as a standard. It could be that it may be different for different hinges, but I didn't see that, at least in my research. Every hinge I saw, which is sort of a European hinge standard, is always 35 millimeter. So I didn't count that as one of the fundamental differences. So back to the point, when I'm talking about Blum, and it's the same company, so it's a 35 millimeter, all three fundamental differences that I talked about, that means the boring distance is also similar. I'll keep it at 3 millimeter. The cup depth is also half an inch, same. And the hinge mounting plate distance is also exactly the same. So I'm not going to make any changes to my door. All I'm going to do is simply put the hinge in for the sake of showing how it works. So I'm going to put the hinge in and connect it to the door as it was connected before without making any changes. So I put the hinge in as it is with no adjustments whatsoever, and this is how it looks. And this is the door in closed position, and as I can see, the door alignment has obviously changed. This is my door in closed position, and it is parallel to the blind corner wall, cabinet wall. And we can see the hinge is turning a corner inside the blind corner. Now, this is the door open position, and this is the door closed position. This hinge also has the traditional three-dimensional adjustment like the first hinge video I showed it in. So I can move the door left, right, top, bottom, and front and back. But the only one place that it might need additional adjustment is where this overlap, where this door overlaps the blind corner wall. If I need a little bit more overlap in this direction, then I might have to move this hinge plate just slightly over there. So instead of 37 millimeter, which is the standard, I might do 40 or 43. And I can see I can do that because I have enough space right here in between the side blind cabinet wall and the hinge. There's enough space here for me to move the hinge plate over to this direction, thereby moving the whole door over to that direction. So that's the only adjustment that could be made possibly with this kind of hinge. The next hinge I'm going to be working on is this Rockler 270 degrees Aximat hinge. One of my cabinet, I need the door to open all the way 270 degrees to the almost to the side of the cabinet wall. And there's very few hinges available to make this 270 degree rotation, especially on frameless cabinets. So this was one of the few options I saw that looked good. Now, the hinge looks something like this. It comes in two pieces. It looks different than the Blum hinges, of course, and it also operates differently. The one thing I noticed is that it's not that easy to figure out how to put this hinge together. So the first thing I had to figure out is how to put them together, to attach them together, because one part is going to go on the door and the other part is go on the cabinet wall itself, the inside cabinet wall. So the way to attach this, and I had to go back to the store actually to figure this out. The way to attach this is there is a on the back of the hinge, these two lips, so to speak, go inside these two notches like this. When they go inside the notch, then I have to turn it around carefully to see. When they go inside the notch properly, I have to press this in. So once I press it in, I hear a click. Should be hearing a click. And it doesn't go in easily because there you go. So now it's in. So when I try to press it, it comes out of the notch that is behind. So as long as I can keep these two lips inside the notch and I push it in properly, it just locks in. And the way it locks in is there's a steel plate right here that locks into these two notches over here. So that's how we put it in, lock it in. But taking it out is also not that easy. So what I have to do is take a flathead screwdriver and I have to put it inside and push the plate away. Once I push the plate away, then it unlocks, and that's how I can take it out. It almost flies off the hand actually, but that's the only way to take it out. Now that I have figured out how the hinge connect to each other, now I have to understand how is this hinge different than the Blum hinges. And like I said before, there are three fundamental areas of differences. The first one is the boring distance. As I look at the boring distance, I can see the cup is entirely different. In fact, part of the cup is outside the door actually. So I know right away that the boring distance is something that needs to be adjusted. The second area of difference is the cup depth. And the depth that Blum uses is 1/2 inch, which is about 13 millimeter. But here it says I need 16 millimeter cup depth. So that's the second area of difference. The third area of potential difference is the hinge mounting plate distance, where it mounts inside the wall cabinet. That's set to 37 millimeter, which is exactly the same as the Blum hinges. So I don't have to worry about it. So in summary, out of the three areas of differences, the boring distance is different. I have to figure out that out, how to drill a hole that is partly outside the door. And the second area of difference is the cup depth, which is easy to adjust with my jig. So instead of 1/2 inch, it's going to be 5/8 of an inch or 16 millimeter. So these are the only two differences that I have to worry about in order to install this hinge. As I've shown in my previous video, the main tool I use to make this 35 millimeter cup is this Craig hinge jig. And I want to be able to use the same jig even for this kind of tricky hinge the Aximat hinge that we're looking at. Let's start with the first difference, that is the cup itself. Now I have to start with a reference point. My reference is the Blum installation, which is a 35mm cup, and I had it 3mm from the edge of the door. So the first thing I need to do is understand how far is this cup in my reference installation. So the cup itself I know is 35mm, and there's a 3mm space from the edge of the door. So if I want to know what is the boring distance for the Blum, which is my reference, that is, I want to know the center of the circle from the edge, then I have this 35mm diameter, so I have to divide it by 2 to get the radius, because this whole thing is a 35mm diameter. So the half of that is 17.5, and plus I have to add the 3mm distance from the edge of the door. So 17.5 plus 3 is 20.5 millimeter. So 20.5 millimeter is my reference distance, that is from the edge of the door to the center of the circle. In other words, when I use my Craig jig to do these holes with my Blum hinges, and I had set it to 3mm boring distance, my holes were created such that the center of the hole is 20.5 millimeter away from the edge of the door. Now that I know that, I need to go look at the Aximat hinges. These holes, the center of the hole is supposed to be 12.5 millimeter from the edge of the door. So now that I know that, I know my reference, which is 20.5 millimeter, and I know that the Aximat hinge needs a 12.5 millimeter, so I can figure out what the difference is. The 20.5 millimeter minus 12.5 is 8 millimeter, which is 5/16 of an inch. That means if I want to shift the hole, which is what I want to know, I want to shift the hole towards the edge of the door, in fact outside the edge of the door. So if I can shift this circle by 5/16 of an inch or 8 millimeters, then I will get the hole that the Aximat hinge needs. So all I have to do is make sure that instead of putting the Craig jig straight against the edge of the door, I need to push it back by 5/16 of an inch. If I can do that, then that circle that will be drilled will suffice for the new hinge. Now, in order to do that, what I did is I took a piece of wood, plywood, and cut 5/16 of an inch wide piece. So all I have to do is put the piece in against the edge of the door, and that will force my Craig jig to be pushed back, because it's going to rest against that cut piece, 5/16 of an inch piece, instead of the edge of the door, and that's going to help me align my hole that is required for the hinge. Now for the second difference, which is this 35mm hole that needs to be 16mm deep instead of half an inch. In order to do that, it's pretty easy. All I had to do is take my Craig jig and take this stopper, loosen it, and push it back, because that's what adjusts the depth of the hole. And I pushed it back about 3 millimeters to make sure that my hole is at the right depth. This is the finished installation for the 270-degree Aximat hinge. The door opens all the way 270 degrees and touches the side wall of the cabinet, this side being the exposed cabinet. Then it closes again 270 degrees back like this. Now this is not a soft close. It avoids banging of the cabinet, but I still have to push it, and then there's a slight bang on the cabinet there. So technically it's not a soft close. On this side, like I've said before, this is the hinge plate on the side wall of the cabinet, and that's exactly at 37mm like the Blum. In fact, this whole thing just rests on the face of the cabinet, so I didn't really have to adjust. I just rested it flush and screwed it in. The other good thing about this hinge, there's a slight adjustment. I think there's three-dimensional adjustment even here. I could adjust this particular screw over here to move the cabinet wall left or right, and that gave me this reveal of 1/8 of an inch, which is exactly what I wanted in my cabinets. And there's also the side of the hinge is exposed here, but that is something expected from these kind of hinges. So that's it. That's the hinge. It opens like this, 270 to the side wall of the cabinet. This is a hinge that I'm going to use in one of the cabinets. So thanks for watching.